Yeah, so I went to Waldorf school as a child. I went to the Ralph Steiner School in New York City from K through 12. And so then after that, I went off and, lived in Italy for 4 years and did stuff. But I could feel I worked for Italian television then when I came back. And it was this very commercial world. And I traveled around, I was a producer, traveled around with a film crew from Italy, traveled around the States, because I knew Italian, that was my meal ticket at that point. And the whole commercial world just seemed so, it had no meaning somehow. And I could feel my Waldorf education starting to kick in. And so then I started to work for nonprofits. I worked for the American Friends Service Committee, and I worked for an organization called Global Education Associates, and I did basically editing and photo editing, that sort of thing. And then I had a child, a 1-year-old, and my husband, who had known me in high school, said, "Hey, why don't we start a Waldorf school for our child?" And so we started what is now the Housatonic Valley Waldorf School in Connecticut. But when it was still a little preschool called Star Meadow, Andrea Lobstein appeared and was my student there. And that is so thrilling to me. So what else? So yeah, I really didn't know anything about Waldorf education per se when I was a student there, because I was just receiving its benefits. But when I had a 2-year-old child, they all said, "Oh, you should be the teacher." And I said, "I'm not a teacher," but they figured I knew what to do because I'd gone to Waldorf school. So then I went and I did teacher training, and I discovered the incredible background, what's behind Waldorf education, which is this whole philosophy. And that was pretty amazing. And so then my journey began. And since then, I was a kindergarten teacher for 6 years. Then I burned out and went away for 4 years and just was an editor. But then I came back and they needed administrators. So I did that, administration and enrollment, for 5 years. Then they had a 4th grade that needed a teacher. So I taught 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then they had a 2nd grade that needed a teacher, blah, blah. Anyway, I've done a little bit of everything in the school. Right now, I'm an educational support teacher, and I work with individual students on what's called the extra lesson. It's sort of like OT, but with pictures and imaginations and music and sort of thing that involves more of the whole child. And our school is now 30 something, 33 years old or something. And I feel I'm sort of stepping back. But yeah, it's very cool to see that when one respects the whole child, one gets a wonderful result. One gets a whole adult. Right, Andrea? So anyway, I don't know. Was that enough to say?
Yeah, of course. I'm sure you're going to say some more as this conversation continues. But yeah, I mean these conversations are pretty casual, so kind of we can open it up if anyone has something rising up in them that they want to share, or a question or a thought, then we can kind of flow with whatever arises. If not, I can certainly think of plenty of things to ask Melissa, but I just want to throw it out to all of you.
You should hear from Nicholas too, if you don't mind, because I invited him to this.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I'm Nicholas, and I've been a Waldorf teacher for 7 years now. Most of that time was at the Asheville Waldorf School, and this past year I've just been creating curriculum more for an online audience, which has its pros and cons, but still in the Waldorf vein. And so I've been mostly a grades teacher, but I've also been a music teacher and an aftercare teacher. And then I've also worked, I was a grades chair for a time as well. So a little bit of leadership there at Asheville Waldorf. And um, Melissa asked me to come and participate in this, which I'm just tickled to do because I love talking about Waldorf education. It's how I got my life partner. And we talked on the phone, and I just started talking about Waldorf education, and she was still there at the other end of the line 40 minutes later, and so I'm like, she must be the one. So I can talk about this forever, but I was thinking maybe just to say a few things about, kind of in a nutshell, what is Waldorf? And so the first thing I want to say is that, I think Waldorf teachers are like missionaries for human development, because we, and anybody who does Waldorf for more than a few years and really gets into it, it's like a calling, and like a vocation, in the same way that a monk or a priest, has that. And it's because I think the depth of inquiry and questioning and study of what a human being is and how they unfold is really, that's what characterizes a Waldorf teacher. And the ones who become successful are those that really are able to penetrate what it is that happens from birth to age 7, and then 7 to 14, and 14 to 21, and so on. And then another thing that a lot of us do in the Waldorf movement is we look at the mainstream and we keep saying, oh, no, don't do that. Oh, no, don't do that. Oh, no, please don't do that. Like, for example, these trends of starting kids earlier and earlier and earlier on academics, thinking that they're going to somehow be smarter later on. And I ask, can you make a plant grow any more quickly by pulling on its stem? And of course, we all know that's ridiculous. And so it is with children. And so, so I like to think of plants as very much reflecting the inner soul life and development of human beings. So if you imagine a plant just as a seed, when it first sprouts, all it really needs is water and soil, and then once it starts growing a little bit, then it needs, water and soil and air and light. And then it grows a little further, and the leaves come out and the stalk and everything. And, once it gets towards developing the blossom, like say a sunflower or something, then it needs, water, soil, light, and heat. And then when it comes to developing the seed or the fruit, it needs water, soil, light, heat, like all of that, even more so. And so you can see at the stage of the plant's journey, it kind of needs these different things. And so similarly with humans. And so if you look at a human being physically, we develop from the top down. So, babies are big-headed, right? Like big noggins with these little bodies. And as they grow, they kind of grow down physically. But on an inner level, they actually kind of grow from the bottom up. I mean, if you look at children from 0 to 7, what are they learning? Well, they're learning to, walk and, climb and run and touch stuff and taste stuff. In fact, my 1.5-year-old son, he's always putting things in his mouth, of course, but I don't even think it's so much to like eat them. He's just kind of like, he's like feeling them. He gets this look on his face like, it's not wood chips. Okay, that's kind of interesting, and it's like, so they just want to learn everything through their senses, and they're learning. I mean, they're walking balance beams, they're doing monkey bars, they're rubbing materials. I mean, like, what is that texture? What is that texture like? And so, I think in education, what is healthiest is to harmonize with that gesture of the child during those ages. And so in Waldorf, we don't do any academics from 0 to 7. We rather surround them with natural materials, which are going to build their sense of touch, and we give them balance beams, and we make sure that the rhythms of, you know, taking drinks and washing their hands and having meals and all that are sort of ingrained, because they build these lower senses of the child. And then, you know, if we do it right, the children will feel at that stage like the world is good. It's a good place. And then, you know, from 7 to 14, this is actually kind of where physical and soul development coincide, because if you look at these children at this age, they all have these kind of very prominent trunks. A lot of them look chubby, but they're not. They're just, their trunks are growing out, their torso, their middle section. And similarly, you know, inwardly, they're developing the feeling life. And so what's really most important, and this is where public school really misses the boat on this in the States, what we're developing between 7 and 14 is the moral sense and the aesthetic sense and the sense of beauty, you know, of what is morally beautiful versus morally repugnant, of what is artistically beautiful, what has beauty and order to it. And so naturally, the artistic process is just like absolutely essential. How can you teach them, you know, these senses of beauty without art? Even if you're teaching math, like, you know, geometry, if you go back to the Mesopotamians, it was beautiful. That's why they did it. And so similarly, we bring it in that way. And then, you know, 14 to 21, then we get into the high school, college years. And this is really when we can speak more directly to the head, to the thinking forces, because, you know, that gesture, and I think all of us know this who have gone through adolescence, you know, you start getting more critical, you start having your own opinions about things, you know, the truth becomes very much more important. I mean, I was like a little politician at 14 years old, you know, like, you know, I could give you lectures on how messed up this country was and the electoral process and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Quite common for people of this age. Anyway, I could go on and on, but, you know, I think, you know, in a nutshell, that's my picture of education in general, which, you know, obviously inspired by the Waldorf approach. Should I say more? Or somebody else want to talk? I don't want to take up all the airtime.
What was really interesting about the connection between aesthetics, beauty, and values, and discovering the beauty of morals and doing that through artistic work. I've never thought of it in that way. I mean, much of what you said was very provocative and helpful, but that in particular stood out for me.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because somebody asked Rudolf Steiner, who created Waldorf education, you know, a couple years after he started it, they said, you know, if you had it to do over again, what would you do differently? And I think they were talking about the grades years between 7 and 14. He said, more art, more and more art. And the more experienced I become as a teacher and the more I learn about how human beings really learn, the more I think that it, you know, if I did it again, and I may end up homeschooling my own children, we'll have to see what destiny brings, but that's really going to be the name of the game in those years. There's a couple of interesting anecdotes to share about that, because Rudolf Steiner himself didn't learn to read or write till he was 12, and, you know, became one of history's most powerful intellectuals. There's a story also about a fellow, very mysterious story about a fellow named Caspar Hauser. If any of you know about this, he was like probably born into some kind of royal bloodline in Europe, and somebody didn't want him ascending to the throne or inheriting power or something. So they, from very early childhood, locked him in a dark room 24/7 and just fed, pushed food under the door or whatever. And when he was about 19, they just, I guess, thought he was, you know, dumb, mute, or whatever, enough that they could just send him out in the world and whatever. So they released him, and he just wanders into town. And he was found by the police, and this psychologist took an interest in him. And amazingly, within about 2 weeks, he learned to speak, read, and write fluently. And so to me, that suggests pretty strongly that, or it even sort of begs the question, what are we so worried about? When we're not, doing heavy academics at a young age, like, what are we so worried about? And what is it that human beings really need to learn? And how is it that they really need to learn at different stages? So, I think about that too whenever parents go, my child like really has to have a tablet, in third grade. They really need to get a cell phone because, this is our world. And if, they need to learn these things. And I'm like, yeah, if you waited till they went to college and then got them a cell phone, they'd take about probably an hour to figure out how to use it. And they'd be good to go, So, for me, it really stirs a lot of questions about, what is it that human beings really need to learn at each stage, and how do we let that inform how we're bringing what we're bringing.
Robin, what is your education background besides being in exotic countries?
I studied independent holistic approaches to education for quite a while until I moved overseas, and then I worked with teachers overseas.
Independent approaches?
Yeah, one of my friends wrote a book called Holistic Education. Its nature and precedences. So not so much immersed in, I've been aware of Steiner for a long, long time, and I have lots of friends who have been Waldorf teachers and whatnot, but other approaches, not just Steiner, that look at child development and how do we nurture the whole child, and just that question that Nicholas was talking about of what is it that they really need to learn. And I kind of feel like what Fern has to add to this question would be advantageous as well, because she's been working in an environment at Rungarun School for many years that I feel like it integrates Waldorf and many other things. But just that continually asking of the question, what needs to be learned, and looking at how to nourish children in different ways at different ages. But I've worked more with teachers than kids, though, overall.
Yeah, Fern, you want to talk?
Yeah, like our school, we pick up some approaches from Waldorf, but for me, sincerely, sometimes I'm not really sure what is a real Waldorf, or what is the root of the activities that we try to apply to the children. Yeah. So, but of course, we absorb the philosophy that we try to make. We try to create an eye of the teacher to see the children that who they really are, and try to make the child center as much as we can. Yeah. So I have a question when Nicholas raised about like what is the human being should learn. Yeah, so I kind of like want to ask you to visualize like what is the day in the life at your school be like for kindergarten, like what do they learn, or what is the teacher teacher goal for each day or teacher attitude being with the children? Yeah, that might be
So
different.
admittedly, I'm a grades teacher. So in terms of kindergarten, I've worked in the kindergarten a little bit. It's quite different than grades. But so a day in the life of a Waldorf kindergarten. Well, let me first say that a lot of attention is put on creating the environment because, our understanding of the human being, the early child especially, is that they are like so living in their environment. And, they're imitative, very imitative at that age. I mean, anybody who knows that, who works with young children, they're very imitative. In fact, it's so cute to watch my son like imitate my eurythmy moves that I do in the morning. Anyway, so the teachers don't say much in kindergarten, actually. In fact, I've gotten a speaking to before by a teacher because I was talking too much in there. Contrast that with a grades classroom where the teacher is like the sun. They're like sort of the sun of the solar system. But anyway, so usually in a kindergarten, the children will arrive in the morning and they'll get involved in some kind of work. So in this way, it may be a little bit similar to Montessori. I don't know much about Montessori, but so almost every day they do cook something. That maybe the assistant cooks something. So some children might be there chopping vegetables with very safe sort of chopping tools, carrots or sweet potato or whatever. And then others may be taking some toys off the shelf and then creating a little scene. There's a lot of fort building, and the materials are all carefully curated. So everything is like wood or wool or silk or just a lot of objects from nature just come straight from nature, right? Because that develops their sense of touch. So you won't see plastic and stuff like that. Even the crayons, we try to use beeswax crayons. And so this morning, first morning section, the children are engaged in creative play, and the teachers are themselves engaged in some sort of creative work. So they'll be knitting, they'll be sewing, they'll be maybe doing a craft, and like I said, not saying much, because we want the children, because they're still in this imitative space, we want them to emulate this teacher. Look, that teacher is working, doing something creative with their hands, especially with the hands. That's a very important part of Waldorf education. And because it becomes their thinking later on. So that's the first part of the morning. And then usually they will go outside at some point. And then there's some kindergarten programs that are entirely outside all day. The forest kindergartens, those are the best. They're just outside they're just in the forest. They're just exploring nature all the time. And then they maybe will come in and have snack. And so some kind of nourishing snack, golden porridge is like a common one. And we grades teachers used to sneak down the hall at lunchtime and be like, hey, you guys have any more of that porridge left? And so we've got the sense of touch. So we've been training their sense of touch through natural materials. And now we're trying to train their sense of life, which we call their sense of life, their ability to know when they're hungry, thirsty, full, kind of like to sense their own wellness or unwellness. And so these healthy foods and these kind of the rhythm of the mealtime builds that. And then usually they'll have a short circle time So that will involve usually some songs and maybe some poems and then a short story. And I think they will tell the same story many days in a row, because those children, they love repetition, and it also supports one of the concepts we have in Waldorf education is of the etheric body, kind of like you call it the life body, or in East Asia they might call it the chi body or the prana, kind of the energy body. And so these, this kind of repetition is good for that part of them. And then let's see, after that they might go outside again and then usually get picked up around midday. So that's, oh, and they might also have a painting lesson in there or some kind of artistic, but it's like very basic. So they might fill a whole page with yellow or red, and but the teacher's like telling a story about this energetic yellow, or this kind of loud red, goes for a run or goes for a walk or something like that. And so these very simple lessons are brought with lots of imagination and imagery. So that's kind of the feel in the early childhood. I could also tell you more about the grades too, if you want to hear about that.
When I was a kindergarten teacher, I'm a sort of talky person, and it was very interesting for me to have to not talk. And it's like my energy went into being, just to like, it was just a new experience for me. And really to be able to just exist as sort of this example, as Nicholas said, like, here's what we do in the world. We work and we take care of things. And everything in the room has a place where it lives. It has its own. So the world is this orderly place. And there's also lots of pre-literacy, like, poems and songs and rhymes and stuff like that. But yeah, no overt academics at that point. But it's, it's so cool that you guys are all into holistic education, because it's like, I feel like we're all coming at this from different angles perhaps, but our purpose is the same. I remember when my son got out of all his years of Waldorf, he had me for a kindergarten teacher, and then he went through the grades. And he couldn't wait to get to our local high school, which is like this imprisonment, like cinder block walls. He was like, yes, so he was so ready to get out. And I just remember, he'd been Waldorf to death, basically. Now, of course, he refers to those years as a dispiriting experience, his high school years in the public high school. But I remember walking through the halls and just thinking, what's the purpose here? Like, who decides what happens here? Like in a Waldorf school, we're all reading the Steiner books, and we all have experienced, the principles behind it, and we're all learning. And in the public school, you just wonder, is there any uniting concept? No. So I think anyone that's interested in holistic education is already way further than that. It was just very strange for me to experience that. And there are, of course, Waldorf high schools, not a lot of them, but there are.
Well, and what you say, Melissa, for me, I actually want to pose a question kind of to the group and maybe have everybody speak to this. What is the goal of education? What's the purpose? I mean, we're all drawn to holistic education because we have, I imagine, some sort of thought out wish for it, some purpose. And so for each of you, what is it? What is that?
Yeah, I have something that's on my mind. Maybe it doesn't speak directly to that question, but maybe it's around it or circling it or something. Um, but it seems like a lot of schooling happens, with the aims of kind of the child kind of landing in the middle, like being kind of average, getting along, fitting into the world. Um, Nothing too special about that child's life. Um, but I get this sense, and I remember getting it from Melissa when we sat down with her in person, um, that it seemed like the kind of education maybe that we're all involved in is seeing this more divine child, or a child that's has great things to offer this world. And as teachers, there's a difference between a teacher who's going through the motions with the aims of the child being average or normal, or fitting in or getting along, and teachers that are looking for that child to change the world, or transform consciousness, or just bring something really beautiful, right? Aesthetics, beauty. um, yeah, and so I definitely think that's probably part of my why, is tied up into that question, is that aim of like kind of igniting or seeing or sparking, or even selfishly getting to be a part of that beauty coming into the world is a great experience as a teacher, to be around a child that feels inspiration or sees beauty or feels freedom, these things. Um, but yeah, I guess that was, maybe I'll stop there for now, but maybe I have like a little drifting question at the end of what others share about how you bring yourself to that every day. Like, how do you keep yourself fueled to, seeing this more than just normal exchange of teacher and student? Or
I wanted to bring the verse that we say at the beginning of our faculty meetings. Children in every age bring something new into the world from divine regions. And it is our task as educators to help remove bodily and soul obstacles out of their way, so that their spirits may enter with full freedom into life. So that's what I don't know if other schools do that. I imagine they probably do. And I also wanted to say something else. So often we will have a child at our school that might be, for example, severely dyslexic or have some real learning disability. And this is an incredible, amazing human being. And you can tell they're going to do amazing things in the world. But as I say to the parents, unfortunately, it is our job to get this child so they can read, write, and do math, even though, they're going to like be incredible engineers or artists or musicians or whatever. So in that sense, in the Waldorf school, all of those other aspects are abundantly nurtured. And then there's the reading, writing, arithmetic, which is sort of the main reason people think kids go to school. And we also have to provide that. And I think in Waldorf schools, maybe that's not even paid enough attention to, anyway, just me.
I was thinking what Cam was saying too about the freedom and that capacity to be free and not in the conditioned mind. Our brains are conditioned. We just are. That's how brains work. But when we tap into something deeper in the self, how do we do that as educators to allow the play and the freedom that is so important, so that the goal, if we look at the goal, which was the question I think Nicholas asked, was how do we create loving human beings who know how to connect with others and to connect with nature and to be self-aware, so that there's a dynamic flexibility in who they are constantly evolving into becoming. And so there's lots of different ways that can happen, but it seems like one of the key factors that I've observed over many years is teachers are learning in relationship with the children, and not set in one mindset or another, but have a kind of an open mindset, which I learned a lot more about in the 3 years I was at Room. So, but that flexibility and lovingness, the love goes so far. So it's amazing, even just with, we just finished our spring term this week, and I'm with, bachelor students and things, 18, 19, 20, 21. But when you feel a sense of connection with them, it changes how there's a dynamic that's so important. And how they can flourish in different ways, and whatever age group that you're working with. So, I'm sorry, I have a really bad cold today, so I'm gonna, or this week, I'm gonna.
It's a very nice question. Thank you. And for me, I feel like education is the goal of the human to that learn to be transformed ourselves, transform to be someone from unknown to known, from never try to do something until we can master in that, and then we know that what we can do, and then we master about it. And also the ability to learn the inside voice, the inner self of ourselves. And for me, I have a strong belief that the human being can develop our mind and intellectual things to gain the utmost thing that we can overcome the suffering in our mind. Yeah, that's this education for myself.
Those are such beautiful answers. Wow. Andrea, do you want to say something?
Sure. I mean, first off, I think it's so cool that Nicholas, as you described, a Waldorf kindergarten, and I feel like Fern and I, like inside of our heads, we're nodding along with your description of what our classroom looked like in terms of you walk in and children are sitting there cutting carrots and teachers are sitting engaged in some kind of craft with yarn, and the presence of the teacher is very similar. And that was just really cool to hear how aligned these schools and these ways of being with children are. And then to think about what Melissa said about how you walk into, New Milford High School, public school, and what are the values? What are those shared meanings of education for those teachers? And it seems empty. And that even though we're coming from, Waldorf, holistic, whatever title you put on it, it's so aligned. And it reminds me then of the process of what education is. So much comes from this inner space of the teacher and how our development is and where our mindset is and our spiritual development is, and how that comes through so much in the presence of being with the students. So when I think about what education is and the goals of education, I think so much, again, I think what most of you said is about human development. And what does it really mean to be, to be in this world? And that, it's not limited to the head and the intellect. There's so many other aspects that often get disregarded, but this feeling of recognizing and wanting to nourish this whole being that will continue to flourish throughout their lifespan, is I think where I find my roots and my inspiration. And yeah, Cam, it's hard sometimes to like keep coming back to that because it's really easy to get pulled in, you know, expectations or what culture and society wants, or more and more early academics. And so it is challenging, and somehow coming, honestly, these discussions help a lot, and having these types of conversations with others who kind of just reaffirm some of these movements. And yeah, it's not needed before 7-year-olds to pull on the stem, and these types of conversations. And then also just the process of continuing to be self-aware, to inquire for myself of what does it mean for me to be human, to be connected, and all of these aspects. And that process almost selfishly flourishes more in the educational setting. Like when you're with students, they pull that out of you. You have to think about these questions yourselves when students are asking you questions and trying to learn from imitating you. Like you have to rise to that. And so it like what Robin was saying, it feels like we learn together, and we keep this feedback loop of, you know, the children bring it forth from us and we bring it forth from the children, and we continue to learn about ourselves through the process.
So what about, can you say something about the program you are starting now in Georgia?
Sure. So yeah, Cam and I recently moved down to Carrollton, Georgia, and we have a space that we're using at a friend's farm. It's a like kind of one room. I'm part of a trailer, and then a large access to outdoor space, playground, garden that we're building, and in the process of doing all that work right now, and access to woods and trails and a lot of connection to nature. So the roots of our program are in many ways drawing from my experience at Rungarun School in Thailand and being in a mixed age kindergarten, but certainly drawing from Waldorf and my own experience being in that, and also from our road trip visiting different approaches to holistic education. And it's kind of this interesting mix and a learning journey for us as to exactly what will arise through this process and what the school will look like. But the essence of it is, so the name of the school is Roots of Life, and this idea that living is learning. Yeah, I finally have a name.
We did it.
Just came up with a name this week. Yeah, this idea that living and learning are one and the same, that when we're living, we're automatically learning, and that learning shouldn't be separate from daily life and the activities of just being. So what may arise from that?
Yeah, so we'll be working with 3 to 6 year olds. Well, mostly Andrea. We'll be working with 3 to 6 year olds, hopefully between 6 and 8 of them in the first year. So starting small, testing our abilities and our space and the community here. You know, Carrollton, it's a very kind of eclectic place. There's some spirituality, good bit of yoga, but then there's also like, you know, pretty deep south going on as well. Pretty mix of population in terms of socioeconomics, racial mix. It's an interesting little place that we're trying to get this to take off. And we'll see. Little experiment.
Do you have a way to invite in diverse populations? Because I know you have diversity around you, but like through the community connections that because you've not just been there this year, this was where you went to university and everything. So
yeah.
Sure. And you did the tribal act that oh gosh, not the,
Yeah, the Mountain Wisdom Camp.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm
that
doing
was on that area too. wasn't
again
it?
next week. Yeah, I head off to the woods for a week with the adolescents, and I'm really excited about that. A little initiation into adulthood for these young men. A lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, it's something we haven't, honestly, we're just trying to get people. So just getting the word out as much as we can. And ideally to, find some people that have some mesh with these things that we've talked about already. Because, there can be a big barriers and a lot of barriers because people, going back to that beauty piece, I think when people come through the public system, they don't know what beauty is. And so,
Amen.
it's like, we're going to have kids outside around like risky-ish environments where, they can, fall and, get splinters and things. It's not sterile like, most of the places around us in terms of early child care programs. So yeah, just trying to find people that can vibe with it enough. And then, that diversity is, be great, but it's not like, I don't know, top priority at the moment. It's kind of just like lift off at this point. And then once we get some space from the ground, definitely, yeah, for sure.
Well, roots of life. Yay.
That's a great name.
So wonderful.
Cam, you had asked, a little earlier, what do teachers do to renew themselves, and kind of, and I think that is like such a vital question. And it's one I think about a lot. First of all, let me say, like, my picture of the purpose of education is basically to develop free human beings who are able to guide their own life, to take their own life in hand, to guide it. Very similar to what Fern said, actually. And, and then similar to what Robin said, I have this picture of, because if a human being is head, heart, and limbs, and I include the metabolism with the limbs, by the way, then, when they become adults, I want them to be creative thinkers, compassionate feelers, and capable doers. That's for me, the holistic picture is like those three: creative, capable, compassionate. And so I think as a teacher, one of these mysterious sayings of Steiner, which I don't think is actually really so mysterious now that I think about it, but is that the children learn most from what you are as a human being, more than what you do and more than what you say. They learn from what you are. And so there's this like very subtle communication from the level of your I am to theirs. And the quality of your I am, your inner world, has a huge impact. I have some kind of like weird stories about this kind of stuff in terms of like what my own thoughts about the children are, and like working on that consciously and seeing changes happen externally in the children. And so I think that a teacher, they have to do their work, their inner work. What is a teacher without inner work? I've seen that happen too. It doesn't look pretty. And so there's that. I think something I've struggled tremendously with is actually health, like keeping yourself healthy, which is always a balance as a teacher when you want to do so much more. And there's this needy school that needs so much more from you. And it's like, how do you keep the balance? Because if they're learning from what we are, if we're like constantly zapping our energy body and constantly running ourselves ragged and burning the candle at both ends, what are we teaching them? And I started to notice with my class in Asheville, this strange symbiosis between my preparation and what the children needed. So I noticed that the like extra things I pushed myself to do that I really didn't have the energy or the wellness for, inevitably they either fell flat or we didn't even have time for them. And this was like a consistent thing. And I was like, isn't that interesting? So it was almost like the children and I were tuned into each other. I was like tuned into their energy. They were tuned into mine. And, on some subtle level, we're communicating, so in a way, I kind of feel like if you have that close relationship as their teacher, you're almost like their channel, you're just like, okay, I'm standing in for some other kind of higher forces, and I'm just, I'm like the glove into which those forces put their hand. And so if I'm listening deeply, then the things I put out are going to really work and be much more harmonious than they would be if I'm like trying to force it or kind of push through it on an ego level. And then another thing that goes along with this that I found indispensable is, and I don't want this to sound weird, but is working prayerfully with the angelic world. Because, we in Waldorf have this picture that every child has a guardian angel with them that's kind of guiding their development. And they'll like help the children if we ask. I've got some crazy stories about that too. And so, for me, it was like each night, before bed, just, picturing the children and their angels and just asking certain questions, like, help me with, it's always like, help me understand, or what is that child saying? Or, help me help them. And more times than not, I wouldn't have any kind of like crazy dream or anything. I would just come in the next day and the child would just be different. And I would just almost like laugh to myself and go, oh, well, that was easy, but it just gave me a sense that I'm, when I'm standing there in the classroom, it's not just me. There is like, it's like, did you ever see Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg, and there's like all these other people in the room, all these like dead people. Anyway, it's kind of like that, the class is just full of, benevolent forces that want to help and are willing to help if we ask. And it's not that we don't do our preparation and we don't do our human work. We do, but there's help available. And I think that has been a big part for me of whatever successes I have had. I credit to the helping beings.
Yeah, I think an important thing is you need to prepare. And when you do, help will appear possibly from a completely different direction, but you have to do your part. You can't just like sit there and wish, right? So that's, you have to work. You have to do the work. And then, somehow the perfect thing to say comes to you out of the ether, right? But yeah, so how to prevent burnout? Art, really, art is what enables us to be in the classroom and tell, okay, this has lasted long enough, and now the next part needs to start. I remember I was mentoring this woman who was an experienced public school teacher. So the clock ruled her, it's like, okay, we're going to have 10 minutes of this. Now we're going to have 10 minutes of that. And afterwards I said to her, did you not feel that the first 10 minutes, it was about to peak, and then you could have like gone with it and then started the next thing. But the tyranny of the clock had her. So that was, that is doing art of any sort, is how one schools one's ability to grasp these subtle types of energies. And and nature, I would say art and nature are what really can renew us. So really my advice to you too is God bless. And really, this is such an exciting time. It's like the fires of creation, the fires of at the heart of the creation of something are really there. There's so much heat in the beginning of an enterprise like that. And so then later it starts to cool out. And I remember in the olden days when we started, everyone did everything and everyone was in each other's face. And, now we've become an institution. We have departments, we have this, everything is cooled off. Parents figure, you guys will do it. You're at the school. Before we were all in it. So it's just such a wonderful, exciting, scary time. Really.
Thank you.
And I remember just wishing for people, everyone that came through the door, it's like another family, it was just this important thing. And it was hard to let people go. But remember, school is like a river. The form will stay, the people will flow through. But if it's meant to be, the form will persist. You'll find out if it's meant to be or not.
Yes, thank you.
That was a nice metaphor of a river. Now I'm going to change the name of the school to something river. Don't do that to me. That was the name of our classroom in Thailand. It was River Class.
Oh, perfect.
Meaningful. Yeah, that was really beautiful. Well, I mean, we are at our time, and yeah, I am really deeply appreciative, Melissa, Nick, for joining us and inspiring and bringing some of that Waldorf wisdom into our conversations. Yeah, please feel free to join us again. These happen every other Saturday, and every time they're different people, they're different conversations, they're different energy. It's really just an opportunity to gather and meet and learn together. So I invite you at any point to join.
Thank you, Fern. It was so great to meet you, and it's so wonderful to have someone from 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. Listening to you guys today, it's inspired me too. Yeah, like it's really like resonant to what I'm doing now as well. When you say like what the education is or the beauty of life, and somehow when we stay in the one institute, one school for a long time, so sometimes it's get used to the structure, and then we lose some sense of sense of like being for the human development. Yeah. So it's very inspiring. Thank you.
And Fern will be coming to America this year, summer, and I really want her to have the opportunity to visit some schools while she's here. So maybe we'll stay in touch, and if that's possible, with in Delaware or in Connecticut or in Oregon, wherever We can send her too.
That's
Sure,
great.
sure,
Uh,
sure, sure.
there isn't much happening in Delaware, I'll tell you that. I mean, I can show you my studio, but
I'm trying to convince Nicholas to move to Connecticut, but so far, no luck.
uh, yeah, we do want to end up in that part of the country. But
Aaron, you're welcome to come to Ashland, Oregon if you want to come through here. The SOU preschool is styled in many ways like Rungaroon. I think they've had connections over more than you probably know about it more than I do. So
Robin, it was
Right.
lovely to meet you too.
yes, it's nice to meet you and Nicholas both. Yes.
that's cool that you know Renee. Yeah. Small world.
Yeah. She's helping start the Holistic Ed Review, and I would invite any of you who are interested to help with future issues where they're always looking for contributors.
Oh,
It just
yeah.
started about a year ago, and
That would be
it
great.
just restarted about a year ago. It happened in the 80s originally, and now it's up and
Yeah.
running again.
So it's a
Thanks in part to
magazine.
Renee and what?
It's a magazine.
It's a journal, yeah, an online journal. Holistic
Oh.
Education Review. The Southern Oregon University is helping with the background tech part of it, but there's a number of people, and we have an international board of directors right now, including the founder of Fern's School in Thailand, but quite a few others too. It really, over the past year, it's just really taken off. So
Yeah.
the last issue in May was about nature-based learning, and they're doing 2 issues a year right now. So,
Mhm. Very cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess my news for the last month is I got invited to be on the board of directors for the new Holistic Education Review, and they just got into the nonprofit status because they've just been working toward that. So there's a lot of momentum there.
Right. Well, as we see when we read the news every day, nothing is needed more in our world than holistic education and people who, are in balance and all that.
Mm,
Mhm.
I agree.
Yep.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.